Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video and welcome to my full complete course on the new version of React Router and the new version of Remix, React Router version 7. In this video, I'll explain to you guys how React Router is now being used as a framework instead of a library and show you how it can be used to build powerful data-driven React applications. We'll start with the basics, installing, setting up routes, and move through key features like data loading, server-side rendering, form actions, and more. By the end, you'll be able to see how React Router streamlines workflows, improving your user experience and simplifying complex tasks, all in one cohesive system. Before we get into the video, if you could leave a like and subscribe, this will tell YouTube that you want to watch more of my videos, which would really help the channel. So if you want to support the channel, that's a great way to do so. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay everyone, let's get started. The first section of this tutorial is obviously how are we going to generate an application using the new React Router framework. Well, you can use a template if you want to, but we're going to start everything from an empty application, not using any templates. We're just going to run the command npx create react router. And we're going to set it to be at the latest version. And I'm just going to put a dot here to represent that I want to create this project inside of this folder that I'm in. And I'm going to press enter. You're going to see it's going to ask us a couple questions. It's going to use the default template. I said we weren't going to use templates, but I kind of meant like templates with already some stuff other than the default one. It's going to ask us if we want to initialize a new Git repository. I'm going to press yes. Install dependencies. I'm going to press yes. And then it's going to generate the project for us. Perfect. Now we can do npm run dev, and you guys will be able to see the project appearing. I have here this browser, and we should see that it should be running on localhost 5173, and this is the boilerplate app that appears. Now that we have installed it, let's go into the second section, which is explaining the basic structure of the React Router version 7 application. So you see there's a lot of files here that are very similar to if you were using any other framework. React Router version 7 is created using Vite. In this case, as you can see over here, we have our Vite config with all of the necessary plugins. It also generates the application using Tailwind CSS, and I guess you can change that if you don't want to use Tailwind, but I do recommend using it. We also have this React Router config.ts, which will be used for you to, as the name explains, configure anything related to your React Router experience, but we're not going to really be touching this. Then there's a bunch of Docker files. Could help you if you are looking to deploy your app using Docker. The templates come with 3 different Docker files, which are optimized for different package managers. So there's a Docker file for npm, there's one for bun, and there's one for pnpm. So if you want to build using those Docker files, it's really easy to do so. And it also has support for, I believe, all of the different platforms. So you could use, you could deploy it to, I don't know, an ACS on AWS. You could deploy it to a DigitalOcean or Google Cloud Platform, whatever you want. And it has these files over here. But if you're not using Docker, you can just ignore them or even delete them. Feel free to do so as well. Now, the next thing we have here is our public folder, which it's the same for almost all React apps. It's just where you're going to have your static assets and all of that kind of stuff. But on our app over here, this is where everything changes a bit. So the full file structure for React Router version 7, it reminisces a bit with Remix and other frameworks, in the sense that we're going to have here our root of our app, which is our root.tsx. This file is going to be kind of like where you define your layout for your app with how your actual HTML structure is going to look like. So there's obviously metadata, there's different links you're going to have, scripts, all you're going to have. There's an error boundary for dealing with any possible errors that you might have in your app, such as running to a page that doesn't exist, and it auto-generates that for you. But then also there's the app component over here, which it returns an outlet. And an outlet by default is just a component placeholder for any component that is going to represent the different pages in your application, so the different routes. So if this route outlet over here, if I were to wrap this around with a div, right, and I were to put a little p tag here that says hey, that means that no matter which route you're in, this hey is going to display, because the route component, the component that is displayed depending on the route, is the one rendered on this outlet component. So if I were to go to if I were to go to, for example, /Pedro, this isn't a route. Actually, this won't be a good example because there's no route. But you'll see as we go on that this should show up. So you could put, for example, a navbar here if you wanted to, but there's other ways to do this as well. So for now, we'll just keep this as an outlet and leave it like it was before. But this is the basic of the root.tsx file. It's where the root of your app is and where the entry point of your application is. Now we get to so this welcome here, ignore this. This is just a component that comes with the boilerplate. We could technically delete this if we wanted to. And that's exactly what I'm going to do, actually. I'm just going to delete this. It's going to break our app for a second, but it will help us. I'll just actually delete this from here. So delete the only part of the app that calls it, and let's just return nothing. Actually, let's return hey. So what I think I should explain to you guys first is how does routing work on this framework. So routing works in a kind of different way from what you might be used to. In React Router, the routing is configured inside of this file over here called routes.ts. This file is only meant to be used to define the pattern of how your routing system is actually going to work. So you see, we have this export default, and it has an array with only one item inside of it. This item is defining our index routes, so our home route. And you can see this is what is actually rendering over here. So we have files in this routes folder, and we have one called home.tsx. What this index is saying over here is that it's saying that we're going to render the index route, so the initial route, and we put the path to where this route file or the component that is going to be rendered exists. So if we wanted to change this to a different component, we would just change the path to that component. Now, this is how you do the index route, the initial route of your app. But if you want to define more routes, we could do it something like this. I can call this route function that exists in this same package. And then I could just come over here and define another route. Let's create another route for this app. Let's call it the about.tsx route. Over here, let's just export const about. And let's export a component that just says something like, hey, welcome to the about page. Now, what we can do is we can set the path to that file over here, and usually that will be routes / whatever file name you have. You can create folders inside of this routes folder as well if you wanted to. Let's make this about.tsx. But since this is a route and not just the index route, you also have to define the path to this specific route. So we put that actually first over here, before where we define where our file is, and we just write the name of the path. So for example, in here, we're going to have the about route. So we can just put about over here, and it will know that this is the path name to that route. Now, obviously, in the index route, we have the text saying, hey, so that's why it's showing this now. But if I were to go to the about page, now you see that this is an error that shows up, and it's asking for a loader. We technically don't need a loader if we don't want to. But one thing that I wanted to show you guys is that in the home.tsx over here, we actually have a specific syntax we need to use to satisfy the route notation. So we have to export default, not export const like I was doing. So I'm going to change this to do the same as before. So export default function about, and now this should actually work and show the about page like we want it to. Now, this is how we create a simple route. But routing is also a bit more complicated than that, because there's multiple situations in which you might want to handle it differently. You might want to have routes that are nested inside of each other. You might want to have, I don't know, routes that are grouped with some sort of UI that combines them. So how do you handle all of that using React Router version 7? So for example, let's start with how do you define routes that are going to accept parameters to their route definition. Well, let's do one over here. Let's I don't know, let's create one for posts. It's the most simple example. Let's actually call it post.tsx. And let's imagine that this is a component that is going to display information about a post if based on a specific ID that post has. So it's going to fetch data from an API. I have actually a public API here for you guys to use. We're going to be using this JSON placeholder API. You guys can just go there. It's a mock API. And if we fetch data based on, for example, a specific ID, if we put 3, it will return back the post of ID 3. So what we want to do is create a component that is a page that when we go to that page in our project, if I go to, for example, post/3, what will happen is it will show the UI for this data. How do I do that? Well, I have to create a function for this, and let's call it post over here. And for now, let's just return a div with nothing inside of it. Now let's come to our route definition and let's add another route. Now this route is going to be to the post.tsx. And if I want to say that the route has some sort of param in it, all I have to do is just add the param inside of here. Let's call it, for example, post ID. Now this is standard on multiple other routing libraries, but what we need to do now is in our post.tsx, we have to load this param into our component. Now, if you're familiar with Remix, because remember, React Router version 7 is basically Remix version 3. They merged React Router version 7, like React Router with Remix, and made React Router version 7. So this is the pattern with getting data in Remix. We're going to have to export an async function called loader. So every component is going to accept a loader function and an action. So I'm also going to make the action here so you guys just have an idea. These are the names that Remix or React Router will be looking for in every component. And if you name it something different, it won't work. The loader is where you're going to be able to load data from different parts of your app. And the action is where you can do some sort of action based on your component. So in the loader over here, for example, we would want to grab here the params from the route. And we can easily do that by defining the params and saying route.loader args. Now we have to import route, and it's not actually from React Router. We have to import it from /@types/ we want this specifically to be about post. Now you see it generated the specific types for the post component. That means that React Router version 7 comes with type safety, and it generates everything automatically for you. You don't have to worry about it at all. You'll find the types for each specific route that you have in this plus types folder and in this respective file inside of it. Now, we want to access, it knows automatically that there's going to be a post ID arg, a post ID param in this route because of the type generation. So we can just say let post ID is equal to, actually I'll make this a const. So const post ID is equal to params dot post ID. And now I have access to it. I could technically just return this. I'm not going to actually fetch the data because we'll get to that point later on in the tutorial. But I could return this over here. And you'll see that to access that in my actual component and display it in the screen, I just have to destructure it from this. We can actually get something called the loader data. And this will be, we have to define the type. It will be route.componentProps. And then inside of here, we can just display the post ID. So I'll say post ID is equal to loader data dot post ID. And now depending on what post or what route we're in, it will actually get that information. So it's very simple, not that complicated. You have to use the loader for that, and you have to get the loader data for that. Now, how do I create nested routes, which is the next thing I think would come into your mind whenever you're working with some sort of routing library? Well, the thing is, we'll want to create here as an example. Let's imagine that actually I'll use both the post and the, well, to do something like that, let's come over here and let's create an example. Let's create a route called dashboard. So we'll create one called dashboard.tsx. And let's imagine that inside of dashboard, there can be two different other routes. There can be the route where we're able to see our finances. I mean, this is all an example, but, and what else can we see? Our personal info. Now let's create the components for the three of them. I'm just gonna actually copy and paste from the about components to make it easy for us. Let's just paste all of them so we can have the UI here. I'm gonna close this. Let's change it to dashboard. Let's change this to finance or finances, and then let's change this to personal info. Now let's change also what's inside of this. Let's say welcome to the dashboard page. Then on this one, let's just say showing finances. And on this one, let's just say showing personal info. Perfect. Now what I want to happen is I want to have a route where if we go to /dashboard, what this will do is it will show the dashboard, obviously. But depending on if we go to /dashboard/finances or /dashboard/personal, I need to write this wrong, right? So personal info, what this will do is it will show the dashboard but with different things inside of it. So how do we do that? Well, it all comes down to the routing definition. Let's add a section here so you guys can have it separated and call it nested routes. Now inside of here, we're going to put another route, and we're going to first define the dashboard route. And inside of this, we'll just say that it's on the routes/dashboard.tsx. Now the different thing here is that we need to put another argument to it, which is an array of child routes that are going to exist nested inside of this dashboard route. So we'll define for example, the finances one over here by saying finances, and then actually we'll just say routes/finances.tsx, and we can do the exact same thing for the personal info, and then personal info.tsx. So nested routing is pretty simple. All we have to do now to actually make this happen, because we can see the dashboard page, but we're not actually seeing the personal info component inside of it, and we're not seeing the finances one inside of it. So how do we do that? Well, in the dashboard page, we can display anything we want, but we also need to put an outlet inside of it to tell React Router that this is where you're going to display the child routes that exist inside of this nested route. So similar to how we have the outlet in the root, we're going to have the outlet inside of here. And it's basically just putting the outlet where you want to display that other component. And you'll see that now it displays the child depending on if we're in finances or in personal info. So it's really simple to do this. I think it's probably the easiest implementation of nested routes I've seen so far, and I think it's really useful as well. Now, there's another type of nested routes that you can have in React Router that doesn't actually require you to add any segments to the URL. Like here we have a segment for that dashboard, but if we wanted to make this without actually adding that segment, we could do so as well. Now, how do we do this? Well, it's as simple as turning this, instead of a route, turning it into a layout. Now for this to work, we have to remove this because there's no more path, because it's not a route, it's just a layout. But what this will do is it will allow us to add some UI elements to both of these routes and make it permanent on both of them. So this route doesn't exist anymore, but personal info exists and finances exist. And on both of them, it will not only show what's inside of the personal info component, this one over here, but it will also show what is inside of the dashboard layout. And we'll go to finances, and you'll see that it will also show the same thing. So it's a nifty way for you to, for example, add, if you need two components to have a certain part of the same UI, you can just render a layout on top of them and then just pass those components over here without having to actually make the URL have extra text inside of it. And again, for the layouts, it's the same thing. You will render the child routes by just using the outlet component as well. Now, the last actual routing thing I wanted to talk about before we get into some of the other parts of React Router version 7, like fetching data and all that kind of stuff, is the idea of a prefix. And this is less important, but at the same time, I think it's kind of cool. And what this is imagine that I want to add, I want to do the opposite of what a layout does. I want to specifically add some sort of prefix to this route, to all of the routes, both finance and personal info. How do I do that? Well, what I can do is I could, inside of this, define a prefix. And a prefix will allow us to put, for example, a specific part of the URL over here. I can call it Pedro. And then I can just pass an array inside of this, put all of the routes inside of this as well. And what this will do is it will add the Pedro text behind both the finances and the personal info routes. So you'll see that now the finances doesn't exist, but the /Pedro/finances exist, and the /Pedro/personal info exists. So this is kind of stupid because you technically could just, instead of using a prefix and a layout, you could just use a route on top of this and call it Pedro, and then put this file inside of the Pedro route. But this is just an example I'm showing to you guys. You can use prefixes in multiple other situations. We could use prefixes over here as well, which would make it less redundant, because what we could do is just put the prefix inside of this, close this off, and let's just put a comma. And now the routes that have the Pedro are the about route and the post route. So if we go to about, you'll see it will show the about page, and we can't actually see it anymore if there's no Pedro in front of it. So yes, this is all I wanted to explain in this brief overview of the different routing notation for your React Router v7 application. Now let's go into something a little bit more interesting, which is the different rendering strategies that you can use in your React Router application. So first of all, if we go to our, let's close this off. Let's go to our React Router config over here. So React Router supports multiple rendering strategies. The first rendering strategy that they support is client-side rendering, which means that the entire app will render in the browser. And if we want that to happen, we just have to set this property over here, server-side rendering, to false. And this will completely disable server-side rendering. Now, if you want to do that, a lot of websites only render from the client. You can do that. Now, I'm not going to make this video is not about the difference between server-side rendering and client-side rendering. There's multiple videos out there, and I've made videos about it as well. But the gist of it is that there's benefits and there's negatives to each of them. The main benefits I see with server-side rendering is it's a lot faster in multiple ways. And what it does as well is it is way better for SEO because the HTML is rendered before. So that means that all of the keywords that you have in your website are accessible by search engine bots, meaning that you'll have a way easier time ranking higher on Google search. So there's benefits for server-side rendering, and I definitely think, in my experience, I'll leave it on as true. And that brings the other part, which is if you want to set it to turn on server-side rendering, you by default it's already true, so you won't have to do anything. But if you change it in the past, just set it to true, and that's it. Now there's a third option, which is the idea of having static pre-rendering. And what this is it will generate static HTML and data payloads at the build time. So to do that, what we can do is we have to define a pre-render function. So I'll disable this over here. I'll take this out, and let's just define here async pre-render function, which will return an array of the different routes that we want to pre-render. So we'll have the index route, we can have the about route, we can have the personal finances route or personal info route, all of the different routes. And why you would want to do this is because pre-rendering is a build time operation that will allow us to generate static HTML, and it will be extremely useful for both SEO and performance. So this is a great option if you are someone who wants to do this and would rather render them at build time rather than rendering them dynamically on the server or just on the client. Personally, I've seen improvements on performance in a way. I haven't seen major improvements on performance, but it's set to improve your performance, but also better SEO, reduced server load, and it is easier to predict how the user is going to experience the app, because each user will see the same version of the page when you initially load your application, since you're pre-rendering the application. This consistency can help you deal with unexpected states or delays that may be caused by runtime data fetching, and I think it's a great option, and I think it's super easy to implement it. I personally will just use server-side rendering because that's how I like to build my applications. Now, this is the basic idea of the different rendering strategies that you can have in a React Router app. Now let's go into how to load data inside of your app. So we talked about, I believe it was it in the about? No, it was in the post, right? And I left this API up for grabs for a second, but it was because I'm going to come back to it. So I told you guys about the idea of an action and a loader, and they're both important for many different ways. They can be used for just, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be fetching or mutating data, but they can also definitely be used for that as well. So the basics of it is that in React Router version 7 and in Remix in general, data is fetched in the route modules using both the loader and the client loader functions, or both if you need to. Now, what is the difference? Well, we have here this loader function, but the loader function, it is used to fetch data for server-side rendering or for pre-rendering. So if we had our server being created here in our application, we could make those server calls inside of this loader. However, we don't have that. As an example, we're going to be actually fetching data from a public API. So in that case, we would want to have a client loader. Now, the loader is also used for accessing navigation. Now, since we are going to be fetching data from this API, we actually want to change this from a loader to a client loader. And over here, we can keep everything the same. It will all remain the same, even with the loader data over here. Now, the only difference is that now we can actually fetch the data inside of here by doing something like const res is equal to await, and then we're going to fetch. And let's put the API route over here. Let's change this to actually just put the post ID inside of here. And what this will do is, in the end, we can just return await res.json. Perfect. Now, obviously, we're not displaying just the post ID now. What we can grab from this is we can grab the whole post. Now, if we look at the data here from this API, we have a title and we have a body. Let's show the title first. So we'll say title, and we'll say loader data title, and then let's show the body, and we'll say loader data body. Now you should see that if we go to the post route and we put a specific post like post 6, it will say requested page could not be found, and that's probably because we were playing around with the routing definitions. Let me see where the it's inside of Pedro. I'm sorry, but yeah. So if we want to access this, we just have to come over here and say Pedro/post/6, and you'll see that it will recognize, it will get the param from this route, the 6th one, and it will make the API request, put the title, and put the body. So we have the exact information. This isn't the 6th one. This is the 6th one. So this seems like, yeah, the data is correct. If we went to 2, the data would also change. So this is the basic example of how client loading works. But if we wanted to load data from the server, we could create a loader over here, not a client loader. And we don't have a server here to load data from, but I'll just write some like generic code so you guys get an idea. This would probably be where you would do something like const, I don't know, product is equal to await, and then db.getProduct, like where you would access your database, and we'll say something like get product, and then pass the param .id, and then you would return the product in the end. This is just an example. We don't have any products or any deep database, but if you were actually loading data from the server, this is where you would do it. And keep in mind, you can also have a client loader and a loader in the same component. Now, this is the example for loading data, but what about the action here? Let me just delete this for now. What about this action thing over here? Well, this action is for mutating data. It will handle both a post request, a put request, or a delete request. After an action completes, all the data on the page is automatically revalidated, so your UI will always stay in sync. Similar to the loader and the client loader, there is a client action and an action. The client action will run in the browser only, whilst the action will also run on the server and is removed from the client bundles. So for this example that we have over here, let's actually change this to a client action, because what we're going to be testing is a post request to delete a specific post, right? Or a delete request, actually, not a post request. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing we need somewhere in our component to display a sort of form that is going to allow us to execute an action. Now, the great thing is that React Router provides us with this form component, which we can very easily use. We have to only define a method over here, and I'll define it as a delete method because we're going to actually simulate deleting this post. This API over here, I use it in a lot of my videos. It won't actually delete this from their data because they wouldn't just allow me to delete their data, but it will simulate a delete request, and we'll be able to see it in our network request over here when that happens. So we'll have a form with the method of delete. Then inside of here, we'll just have a button, and we'll say delete over here, and we'll give a type to it of submit, so we can submit the form. Now, all we have to do is we would have to come over here to our client action, and we would need to access the specific ID from the post to actually delete it. So we're going to use the same arguments over here in our client action so we can get the post ID for this specific post. Then what we're going to do is we're going to first, we're just going to await, fetch, and then we'll put the same link as this one over here, but instead of actually having it as a fetch request, I have to actually I'll just say params.postid instead of creating a separate variable. But then we also have to put a method over here. Actually, let's make this into an object. We'll put a method, and we'll just say method is equal to delete. So we're making a delete request to this API endpoint. Now we want to just test this out. We'll save this, and we'll come over here. You should see we have the delete button. Let's open up our network tab over here. Let's refresh this. You see that when we refresh, we get this API response here, which is the data that we're getting, right, for the specific post. And you can see that it's coming, it's a GET request coming from the JSON placeholder API that we're using. If I click on the delete button, two requests happen. The first one is the also to the same API, but it returns nothing in the back because that's how the delete API endpoint works. It will delete. So it successfully deleted this. It didn't give us any errors, and it didn't return anything because there's nothing to return. But it also fetches back the data because, like I said, after an action is completed, all the data in the page is automatically revalidated so that the UI will stay in sync with the data. So it fetched the data so that if this was actually a deleted thing that we were showing, it would actually show the deleted data. But obviously, the API won't delete this data, so that's why it's still showing. For simplicity reasons, if we want to do something a little bit more cool, like redirecting us to the main page, we could do it using the redirect function from React Router. It's as simple as just literally calling redirect and then putting this thing over here. And you'll see that now if I click on delete, it will redirect us to the main page. Great. Now, there's a different way you can actually submit data using a form, and the way you do that is by using the fetcher form. And the way you do that is by calling your actions using a fetcher. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, because there are a couple differences between calling your action using the form component from React Router over here and using the fetcher, which is also something that comes from React Router. The first difference is that if you're using a form, you're going to have, like a normal form, whenever you submit that form, it will trigger a navigation. And if it's a method equals to post form, the current page's route action is called, and then the route navigates to the resulting route after the action completes, adding a new entry to the browser history. Now, if you were to use this other method, which is the fetcher form, it does not cause a full navigation or adds anything to the browser history. Instead, it will just submit the form data to the specific route's action and updates only relevant data in the UI, making it completely ideal for updating data in line without changing the URL or breaking the user browsing flow. So in my opinion, in this case over here, we would probably want to use the normal form, because we're going to end up in a different page anyway. So it is possible that the updated version of the current page after submitting will follow a normal navigation pattern. However, if for some reason we don't want to actually return this redirect, we want to return actually a thing saying was deleted, or actually I'll say is deleted is equal to true. Let's make it such that we'll try catch this. We'll try this fetching functionality and we'll catch it. Actually, I need to put the catch. And what I want to do is if, I need to put the parentheses or this curly braces here. So if there was a success in our fetching, we want to return this. We want to return saying that it was actually deleted. But if there wasn't, we'll return the variable saying it was false. And we'll also put it like this perfectly. Oh, we'll change this to false. So we're returning some information that we want to display in our current component instead of redirecting to a different page. Well, in this case, it would be perfect for us to use the fetcher form, which is a different method of serving an action. So how would we do this? Well, we would change this to, instead of using a form, we would actually, at the top here, we would call the use fetcher hook and create a fetcher instance. So we'll say use fetcher, and then we'll replace this form with a fetcher.form and this as well. Now, most of the rest stays the same, but the difference is that now we can access this is deleted over here by using the fetcher. So let's create a variable called is deleted, and let's set it equal to fetcher dot data dot is deleted. So this will allow us to access whatever is returned from this without having to use the action data, which, by the way, if we were using the form and we wanted action data, we could use it like that. But we use the fetcher here. And in this example, let's just wrap this around with some curly braces and also with a fragment, so that we can basically say that if the data is not deleted, then we'll show this. But if it is deleted, we'll remove it. So let's test this out. So this is the data, right? We'll check the network request over here. We'll see that when I click delete, it should fetch the data and it should hide this. And this is exactly what happens, because the request happened, the delete request here happened. Even though we fetched the data and it worked, this is deleted was populated, and we are able to conditionally render this. Now, one thing I also noticed that I did wrong, it was just this. This isn't supposed to be a loader arg. It technically works the same, but semantically, we should make this into a client action arg, not a loader arg. So there are different types for depending on which function you're using. And obviously, like I said, this doesn't change anything because both of them will have access to the post ID, but you should use the correct types. Now, the next thing I want to teach you guys is building on the example that we dealt with using the redirect function to move us to the main page whenever we deleted a post. There's different ways you can navigate using React Router 7. Now, obviously, we already went through the redirect, but that redirect function only works there. We can't actually, like if I were to have a button here, let's just create a button and say redirect, and we unclick this button and we call the redirect function here, you'll see that that doesn't work. If I try to click on that, oh, I'm in the wrong page actually. Let's go back here. So if I try to click on that, it won't work. Now the reason why it won't work is because this redirect function is only meant to work and navigate whenever you are in the loader or in the action functions. So it doesn't work in your component. If you want to navigate to a specific route in your component, if you're used to React Router, you might know that you can use the use navigate hook and create a function called navigate and just call the use navigate hook and change this redirect to navigate, and you should see that now if I click on that, it will actually navigate. So that's one other way of redirecting and navigating in your project. Now, obviously, there's the most obvious one, which is creating a link. And a link in React Router is pretty simple. We can use the link component over here. This is just a simple hyperlink. We can say something like about and put the link to the about route, which I believe is also Pedro/about. Yeah. So we'll say to over here, and I have to import this. Sorry, let's just import, and we can go to the /Pedro/about route, and you should see that if I go to about, it will go to the about page, right? That's another method of navigating. Now, the final method is the NavLink, and a NavLink is a bit similar to the link, but a bit different as well. So let's import this from React Router as well and change this end over here. Now, this NavLink specifically is a component meant for navigation links that need to render active and pending states. So it will be more useful if we change this from here and put it in, for example, the root, right? Because or somewhere else where we would have a navbar. It's meant for having for being used, for example, in a navbar. So I'll put it up here. Let's create a little div and then just call it something like navbar, and then let's put the NavLink inside of here. We have to obviously import it, and we can make other links as well. Let's make one to the finances route. Let's see how we get there, because I already forgot. It's in the dashboard / actually it's not in the dashboard because this is a layout. So it's in the finances route, just that. So let's change this to finances. And let's change this to finances. And by default, you should see that if this now appears or should appear in every single route that we have, right? So it appears on the home route, it appears on the about route, in the Pedro/about route, it appears on the personal info route. It's always at the top as if it was an actual navbar, right? Now, it does work normally as well. If I click on this, it will work similar to the normal link component, but it also has some cool CSS styling that you can work with. So for example, let's do it all directly here. When you set up a style, for example, or you can do this for a class name as well, or for children's of this NavLink, you can do it for all of them. It allows you to have a callback. Now, what is that callback? Now, this is a function that is going to return an object, obviously, because we need to return the style. And it allows us to access information like if this is active, if it is pending, or if it is transitioning. Now, with this information, we could, for example, set it such that the color of this link is red if it is pending, and it's black or white, actually, let's make it in this case, if it is not pending. So let's say color, if is pending, is red, but if it's not, it is, actually, let's make it blue. So you'll see, wait, why is this giving us an error? Oh yeah, I just realized, sorry about that. We have to destructure this from the argument to have access to them. But yeah, so now you'll see that by default, it's not pending when we click on this, so it'll be blue. But for a brief second, when I press on it, it would be red. And we obviously can't see it because the navigation is super fast. But that's kind of the way you could change this. A good example as well is actually, instead of using is pending, let's do an is active. You'll see that, and let's do the same thing actually for this NavLink as well, so you guys can see. It's great because we are in the finances page. So this is the active link. So whenever we are active, it will show red, but whenever the link is not active, it will show blue. So this is a better example for you guys to understand. We are in the finances page, so the finances link is red and the about is blue. But if I go to this one, it will switch. So it's a nifty way for you to actually do some custom CSS styling. You can use the is transitioning as well if you want to. I personally don't use this. I'm gonna be completely honest, because I don't think I've ever needed to do something like this. But a lot of people who are more CSS, more styling based, they definitely will enjoy this, and it's a good way for you to style your website as well. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the idea of pending UI, which is very common in whenever you're fetching data or in every single part of your website, which might deal with some time delays. Now, the most basic example would be with routing. If the routing is taking a bit, we might want to show a little text showing that it is pending. So a way we could do that very easily is by using the use navigation hook. Let's do this on the post, similar to this one over here, and let's go to the post 6. Actually, let's go to post 3. Oh, actually, yeah, it has to be again Pedro. Perfect. Okay, so we have this post, right? And while it is navigating, we'll want to see if that is the case, if it's still navigating. So we can use the use navigation hook. It will give us access to this navigation variable, which contains information about the navigation history, including, for example, if it is navigating or not. And we can just get the navigation.location, and we can turn this into a Boolean, and it will represent the true or false statement if it is navigating or not. And if it is, we'll just say if is navigation, then, or if it's navigating, sorry, let's actually make it navigating. Then if it's true, let's just return a p tag saying navigating. I find it really hard to know if this will actually show any UI for us, because yeah, it does, because it's very instant, right? Let me actually add also a NavLink for this specific post, or I'll just add a link, whatever. I'll just come here. Let's add a link for this specific post 6, and then we'll say 2, and we have to import link, and we'll say 2 /Pedro/post/6. We'll see that if I go to post 6, for a brief second, it shows that it is loading, because that brief second is when we are navigating. So you see, this is a great pending UI you might want to have in your app. Obviously, don't put just navigating, because what even is that? You want to probably put like a spinner or something like that. And you would do something similar if you are fetching data or doing some sort of action or submitting data. So let's see how we can deal with that UI. So how would we deal with setting a loading state for example, this delete button over here? Now, we can use the fetcher that we already have over here, and it already gives us access to some pieces of information, like, for example, the data. But we could get another piece of information, such as is deleting, by accessing the fetcher.state. And if the state is not equal to idle, then it is deleting. And if it is equal to idle, it means that it has finished executing. So we could do something like this. If is deleting is true, then let's just return. Actually, I'll put it inside of here, right? Makes more sense. So I'll put it below this and say is deleting is true. Then I want to put a p tag that will say something like deleting post 3 dots, and then actually I'll just make it one case. So what you'll see is that now in this post, if I click on this, for a brief second it will say deleting post, and then it will delete it, and I could obviously go back to the main page. I can do all of that. So this is the idea behind getting a pending UI for when you're submitting a form. And this is basically it for this deep dive on the new React Router version 7 framework. I personally think this is amazing. I've been loving Remix recently, and I think that this version of it combines a lot of the cool things from React Router from a lot of the cool things from Remix. Now, one of the problems with React Router is that they do change a lot every release. They completely change a lot of things, which is kind of annoying. But also, I feel like we are migrating more into Remix with as time progresses. I'm seeing an upward trend in people using Remix instead of Next.js, for example. So I definitely think that there's potential and there's a lot of value in you starting to use Remix in your own applications. If you want to check out the code for this tutorial together with a step-by-step explanation of everything I've taught, I'll put a link in the description to a post, an article on it that I wrote. If you want to check that out, go to my website, PedroTech.co. Also, the code for this video is going to be in the description. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm posting 2 to 3 times a week, and I would massively appreciate if you could support the channel. And yeah, that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.